Welcome to the Arsenal Vision post-match podcast.
Well, then Perez has got the better of it, and he looks to get the better of Schmeichel, and he's done it. Wilson's going to fall here for Alexis. Henry, chance, goal!
This is me and Liam from arsenalvision.co.uk.
Hello. Thank you for tuning back into the Arsenal Vision podcast. This is not a post-match podcast because there's no Arsenal matches at the moment. It's quite depressing. Thanks to the wonderful, enjoyable, fun international breaks where we get to watch rubbish teams play against teams and chances of injuring our players in pointless matches nobody cares about. Well, I'm lying. Some people do. Because of that, we thought it might be a good idea to do a season review. Give you something to listen to during this international break. Little favour. Nudge, nudge. And in return, if possible, if you wanted to, if you could write a review, a positive review, preferably, about the Arsenal Vision podcast on iTunes, it'd be much appreciated. As you know, podcast is fairly new, and because it's fairly new, it isn't ranked very highly, sob. But, you know, if you give some good feedback, it will be pushed further up the charts, and that will be much appreciated. If you want to do that, if you go to the Arsenal Vision website, on the podcast page, on the latest podcast, this podcast, there's a link there. It shows you how to do a review on iTunes. So if you get the time and you feel like you want to do it after the podcast, well, this is good. I fancy doing that in return. That'd be much appreciated. If not, then I love you all the same. I'm sure everyone else does as well. So I'm going to be back after the Liverpool game when we stuff them 3-0, or we draw, or we lose. Enjoy the podcast, I'm sure you will, and I'll speak to you then.
Zombie podcasters wander through desert of international breaks, searching for brains or things to discuss Arsenal about with live mics to record them. This is the interlull edition of the Arsenal Vision post-match podcast. I guess we could just call it the Arsenal Vision International Break podcast. What we're going to do, because we're in mid-season, is do a season review. As if we're not in mid-season, and cover such pressing issues like who we should sign in the summer and who we shouldn't sell in the summer. It's never too early to start talking about transfers, especially when you want to get your downloads up. But before we talk about getting things up, let's talk about the men who are going to get them up. The things. Not. Anyway, first and foremost, it's James. You can find him at GoonerFanatic49 on Twitter. James, welcome to this special edition Arsenal Vision podcast.
Hello, so great to be here, Elliot.
Oh, don't even try it. Don't even try it. And joining us all the way from the United States of America, it's Paul. You can find him on Twitter at Pausing in My Pants. Paul, thanks for joining.
Woohoo.
All right, good. My name, by the way, is Tuck Winkerman. No, my name is Elliot Smith. You can block me on Twitter at Yankee Gunner. I'm going to pitch in my opinions on this podcast, so that's your cue to tune out now if you'd like. But we are going to cover the best and worst of the season, talk a little bit about where we've come from, where we are heading to. Do you know where you're going? Do you know where you're going to? Anyway, do you like the things that Arsenal is showing you? So let's kick off first with the highlight of the season in terms of a game. And the way we're going to do this is I'm going to ask each of Paul and James the same question, but the second person to answer cannot agree with or repeat the answer of the first person. So we'll get a little diversity. We'll try to get more of the season covered and have a little fun along the way, because that's what it's all about, right? So we'll start with best game. James, it's been a season where we've sort of caught fire lately, and we're on a hell of a run, but not always the most convincing performances along the way. So far this season, what's been our best game in your mind, the one you enjoyed the most?
The one I enjoyed the most was, without any doubt, without a shadow of doubt, the game at Old Trafford. Mm-hmm. For the main reason being that going into the City game, I actually thought there was a modicum of hope of us coming out with a victory, for whatever strange reason that may have been at the time. But going into Old Trafford, given the curse that has been following us with regards to that fixture for many a year now, and this hoodoo associated with any fixture against United, I was so convinced that the best case scenario was a draw. And I think also the way in which we came out with the victory was a little more Although it was, it's 2-1 compared to 2-0, it wasn't quite the barricade or sort of the backs to the wall throughout the entire 90 minutes to the extent that it was at the Etihad. And also just the sort of fairy tale story with Danny Welbeck getting one back over his old side, having been a boyhood United, sort of growing up in the area, being a fan, etc., and then having the manager who deemed him not good enough to play for the club to then score the winner. And obviously the added, the icing on the cake, the cherry on top of it being the FA Cup and getting to Wembley. So yeah, without any doubt, I mean, the emotions running through me after that were phenomenal, and hopefully we can repeat that in the next 2 games at Wembley. Hopefully next year.
Amen. Well, I mean, it's certainly been the biggest hurdle this season to silverware, and now that we've jumped it, I mean, there's a real chance to repeat as FA Cup winners, which would be, a tremendous achievement. And it's a trophy Arsene Wenger has great history with. All right, Paul, that's a tough one to beat. You're going to have to come up with something different.
It is, and it was actually my first choice. So,
well, you're going to have to go with your second choice. Oh, I forgot to mention, by the way, I'm scoring this discussion. 3 points for a win, 1 point for a draw, no points for a loss. So good luck with that one, Paul.
Oh, okay. I was going to say it's like being at the disco, showing my age, where like the girl you had your eye on, some other guy grabs her, and then you move on to the next one. But I don't remember any scoring parts, so maybe it's not like a disco at all.
I'll tell you, first of all, I give you credit for saying it's like going to the disco, because it shows it's been a long time since.
It's been a long time.
But we will have outtakes of this podcast, and we can all share our favorite single memories, and hopefully James is still making many of them, as I believe certainly the junior member of the staff. But, all right, you're stalling. Come on, we need your answer.
James and Mesut Ozil are currently making memories in the disco, as I understand.
Swoon. Okay, you're stalling.
Anyway,
let's have it.
All right, here we go. City, the City game. It was tremendous fun. A bit like the United game, it burst the bubble of beating top 4 teams, even though United wasn't in the league. It was in the cup, but that's all right. I think those were 2 signature games. I think they'll carry us a long way in terms of belief. I think since then we've seen City maybe a little bit more susceptible than we even thought they were at the time to unpredictable results. But it was a tremendous game. We played really well. We played really solid. It gave us a lot of belief across the board, and I think we all came out of that swimming. And I think on the one hand, we've beaten 2 top teams, you could say, and drawn with Liverpool away at Anfield, which was a terrible performance, but we could have won it had we not conceded in the 9th minute of injury time. But we got a point at Anfield. So, if you look at the big 3, 4, 5 competitors, there's 2 of them where we've got wins. Unfortunately, one was in the FA Cup, and hopefully we'll be able to do that in the league soon. So those are the marquee events. As usual, we're battering teams lower down us. So I think that's why those 2 wins and why City being the first of those lives strong in my warm memories.
Yeah, I'm going to actually score this one a draw, and I'm sure James is going to feel hard done by. But the reason I'm scoring it a draw is I think the City game may have been more pivotal than the United game. The United game was probably the one that we as supporters enjoyed the most, and understandably so. But the City game came at a time in the season where I think we were still teetering between being a team that was coalescing and a team that didn't think it could win the big game. And that really was the first watershed moment for us over the last few seasons where we've gone away, played well, been resolute, won a game against one of the top sides. And I think had that not happened, I don't know that we get on this good run, and I certainly don't know that we beat United in the Cup. So I think in terms of which meant most to the supporters, James, I think there's no debate. It's the United game. But in terms of which was most pivotal in our season, I think you could argue the City game was important in the way it tipped off the run that we're on now and the confidence to go and ultimately get the result in United. But
I tell you, Elliot, as you explain your reasons for adjudicating it's really hard to understand why you didn't pick me as the winner in that. Made a very compelling case for me.
Well, I made a compelling case for why your choice was better for the team, but we're also talking about which was best for the supporters. So let's not be lobbyists here. No one likes a lobbyist. Apologies, no offense intended to lobbyists. Okay, enough of this positivity. Worst game of the season. Paul, you get first crack at it. What do you think was really the nadir of our season to this point? The
nadir. Good grief. Hang on while I look that up.
Bottom. Bad stuff. I know you know what it means anyway.
I did. The apotheosis. Oh, no, that's never mind. So I would go with that Monaco game. It was certainly my lowest point. It was the point at which the false hope seemed to be belied by our continued naivete. And to hear Arsene say those words, I just wanted to grab something blunt and stab myself in the eye socket. That
you heard it here first, folks. Paul likes the blunts. Keep going.
Okay. And so anyway, just the way we grabbed defeat from the jaws of victory, the way it crushed our Champions League, it's almost like after seeing signs of progress, it brought us back to all of the things that people said that I don't always buy into are the flaws of this team, of Arsene's setup, of his philosophy, of his stubbornness, blah, 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 which I don't... I understand why they go there with that stuff, but I don't agree with it. But Monaco brought me down to that low place where I was sitting around looking at these guys, finding it hard to argue with them.
Yeah, and it was all the more crushing because of the fact that it really meant that the task was too big in the first leg. It reaffirmed all the criticisms, as you said. It put us in a position where no matter how well we were doing domestically, you just couldn't escape the feeling that maybe we hadn't really resolved a lot of the issues that we, I think, secretly had hoped or quietly had hoped we had put behind us. There's a lot of talk with Arsenal about turning corners, learning lessons, and the Monaco game was a stark reminder that corners just don't get turned and lessons don't get learned, and that's a rhyme that you can borrow if you're writing a song at home.
And just before you go on, Elliot, I also picked it because you love the Champions League, and I want to win this round. Yeah.
Well, depending on which, I'll tell you this, you have the inside track. There's one game James can pick that will appeal to me and earn him the draw, and if he picks a different game, you're going to get the points. James, what was the worst game of the season in your opinion?
I completely agree with everything Paul said. Am I doing this right?
No.
No. All right, there's two other games that stand out.
You only get to pick one of them.
I was at both of them, which made it for an even more joyous occasion. The first, which I'm not going to choose it, but it was heartbreaking nonetheless, but it wasn't quite as pivotal because it was in the group stage of the Champions League and it didn't hinder us from going through, was being pegged back from leading at home to Anderlecht 3-0 and conceding 3 in such Arsenal-like fashion. We can talk about the Monaco game, but I mean that was Arsenal in a nutshell.
I like the buckshot approach you're taking, which is trying to reference a game that might be in my mind before you get to the one you're actually picking.
Elliot, he's looking for a clue from you. Be very careful with your tone. Don't make any noises or sucking noises.
It was a terrible game. Onward to the one you're picking.
Okay, but that was heartbreaking, but even more painstakingly. And, watching from the sidelines, by gosh, have I ever felt such a low point in my life, Elliot? No, I have not.
Oh, for God's sake, man, rip the plaster off your hairy leg.
All right. I talked about this hoodoo, this curse against United.
Jesus.
And here we are. We're playing a Louis van Gaal side at home at a time when they were struggling severely in the league. Not that they necessarily weren't when we went to Old Trafford, but they were at least on a, win-wise, and the actual sort of results they churned out were positive. But at the time, we're playing again in a very similar fashion to the Moyes side that we played last season. And albeit, we started off very well, kept possession, and we had that huge the Wilshere chance sort of in the 30th minute or so, midway through the first half. And it was just... the script had already been written before the game. We all knew to a certain degree what was coming. It was certainly effectively the equivalent of what I was expecting to happen once again at Old Trafford. It was this Groundhog Day, repetitive, mind-numbingly painful, sort of head-banging fixture of completely dominating a game and then being this nonsensical idea of becoming desperate early on in the second half at home to a side in which we controlled the game from the start and conceded two absolutely unbelievable goals to concede and basically shot ourselves in the foot against one of our biggest competitors for, I mean, even at that stage, it looked like it was just going to be another hashtag race for top four season. And, again, especially just against a team with, that has been cobbled together throughout this season, hasn't really found a rhythm of its own, hasn't really found its own identity. And there we were, as we do, the Gunners, shooting ourselves in the foot. And yeah, that was certainly, without any shadow of a doubt, the nadir of our season.
You know what? You're going to kill me, Paul, but that's the one I was looking for. It's another draw, and I'll tell you why. I mean, it's funny. I think you could make an argument that the game I hated most was not even the loss to Tottenham away, but the draw to a really poor Tottenham side at the time at home when Alexis Sanchez was left on the bench in a game where you really saw all the early season flaws of Arsenal on display. But the reason I think that United game is so important is because it was a precursor to, or it was foreboding of what happened against Monaco. It was fall behind at home, and instead of having the sophistication to chase the game, but chase the game elegantly and intelligently, we did it in a way that even a Sunday pub league side would have a chance to hit you on the counter for a goal or two. And the scary thing is, if Angel Di Maria was better on the day, they really could have made that 4-1, 5-1. And we dominated them, as you said. So it was a really, really low point to have a terrible United side come to ours, be outplayed, and then we just chased the game horrendously. And ultimately, it was a portent of things to come against Monaco. So I think those games are intertwined and linked. Obviously, Paul, the one in the Champions League means more to me, but I have to be an independent adjudicator here. I can't allow personal opinions to weigh. So it's tight. It's 2-2 going into the individual section of the sequence. And I'm going to flip it this time because I don't want Paul to always have second pick at the positive answer. So we're going to stay negative and then we'll go back positive. We're going to say, which player has most disappointed you this season? I don't want to say has been our worst player, because your worst player could be someone who you never expected anything from. But which player, James, has most disappointed you this season?
So I'm going to, as I often do, slightly diverge from the question to begin with. I think the player...
Well, here's your win, Paul.
the player that has had the most disappointing season personally, I think for me, without any shadow of a doubt, has to be Wojciech. Just because of, having come out of last season as a Golden Glove winner, and to really lose his place to a goalkeeper that I don't deem to be as strong as him, through something that's so petulant and so childish, and so easy to avoid. I mean, the performance against Southampton wasn't great, but I don't, that wasn't the reason why he's been dropped, and it has been Wenger really has stamped down as a result of it, and we speculated at the time whether it would just be kind of a short-term punishment, but as we see now, it really is something that looks like it's going to extend right until the end of the season. Although he is now our sort of in Fabianski-esque fashion, our FA Cup goalie. I think the player, now you're going to be surprised by this, Elliot, the player that's disappointed me the most is probably Aaron Ramsey.
It's so funny you said that, because that was a player that I kind of had as a dark horse for this candidate, for this question.
But the reason, when I say he's the player that's disappointed me the most, I don't think he's had an atrocious season. I just think because I, as you know, have extremely high expectations of him, and I think he's such a fantastic asset to this team, and I think he's such a quality player. And we've seen flashes. We saw it in that dead rubber against Galatasaray away, and we saw it at home to, who was the team that we played recently at home?
West Ham, who we dominated.
Yes. Well, it was Was it the West Ham game? Yes, it was the West Ham game. Yeah. And but outside of that, I think he's been. I wouldn't say he's necessarily been a passenger in our first team. It's just he hasn't reached anywhere close to the levels that he's shown last season. And at that time we were discussing, was it a purple patch, especially that period from say late sort of Octoberish into January until he got that injury. But we saw he came right back immediately after that injury, and he was again showing a rich vein of form. And who can forget obviously just how pivotal he was in that FA Cup finals, really capping off his season with the winning goal. Mm-hmm. And this season, I mean, he has been. There's no doubt he's been frustrated with several recurring hamstring injuries, but he's gone back to the sort of at times the sloppy Ramsey who tries these little flicks. Overcomplicates his game, and I don't think, and maybe one of the issues we're seeing is that that work rate that he brings was perhaps even more influential in a team last year where we had a couple of passengers out wide. We had attackers that weren't able to contribute to the team as much. I mean, he didn't have a player like Coquelin who was able to sweep up around him. So perhaps a player like Coquelin is doing some of the work that he was otherwise doing last year and is sort of taking away some of, not that he's necessarily been bad defensively, but he hasn't been so much of a necessity as he was last year. But the thing that has really been lacking has been his general play in the final third. I mean, it was West Ham where he got the assist and scored, wasn't it? I mean, yep. I've had a complete mind blank. Yep, yeah, I mean that was the Ramsey. That was the Ramsey that I love and we know. But unfortunately, we haven't seen anywhere near enough of it. And as a result of that, because of the expectations I have of him, it's made it that much more frustrating to watch in general.
I think that's absolutely the most courageous answer I've ever heard, given your bromance, your man love for Ramsey, and I credit your courage. But Paul still has a chance to claw away the points. Which player has disappointed you the most, Paul? And by the way, I love the peeing on Szczesny to kind of claim that as your own answer. to take him away from Paul. But Paul, I'm ruling that out as his selection. So certainly, if you want to go with Szczesny, he's still up for grabs.
No, and I don't agree with James, which is good for the pod business. But I don't agree with him on Szczesny. Mm-hmm. First off, I don't think it meets the criteria because as a player, he hasn't been that disappointing. He's actually played okay. I think Arsene, in many ways, is trapped into the current decision. It's a verdict in which he's banished Szczesny to the four corners. But I don't think that's really the situation. I think if Ospina had been a little bit more shit, Szczesny would be back in by now. Mm. And plenty of... I was watching some highlights this morning of various games from earlier in the season. There are plenty of games that Szczesny saved us. So it's not his best season by any means.
Just off the record, off the record while we're recording a podcast, off the topic, I think we are creeping back towards a very perilous goalkeeping situation at Arsenal after feeling like we had come out of the woods. Yeah. But that's a debate for another day, and hopefully we're not sitting here on a post-match podcast saying, oh no, our keeper situation has cost us points in the run-in. But, all right, so who are you going to have as your most disappointing player?
Well, because he's let us down so many times in the Champions League, I'm going to go with Per Mertesacker. And so, I mean, we all saw the same thing. His form has returned in one sense. So his post, New Year's blues, World Cup hangover, I think we all kind of understood that, even if we didn't really understand it. His form has returned. He's playing as of old. But to me, the issue with him is just that the only way it works with him is with Koscielny in place. And it shouldn't have to be like that. Arsenal, for who Arsenal is, I love Per. I think he's a good player. But for how we play, he's been a point of significant vulnerability for us that too many players around him have to make up for, and he's going to cost us any time. The beauty of having Gabriel and Koscielny the other day was we can push as far up the pitch as we like. We can intercept ahead of the ball. We can chase back and win the ball. We've a ways to go with Gabriel. But the issue with Per is if it's the wrong kind of game for us, we're on tenterhooks for the whole game if somebody gets in behind him.
I think it's actually a really, really good point because this is a guy who's vice captain, one of the first names on the team sheet, until this season, came back not looking like his head was in the right place from the World Cup, hasn't been locked in and focused all season. And for Per Mertesacker's starting role to be now a genuine debate, I think is a huge fall from grace for a player who was the anchor of our defense.
Indeed. And the Champions League, Elliot. Don't forget about the Champions League.
I see what you're doing, Paul. I get it. So, I hate to say it because the courage to pick Ramsey was enough to win this, but pulling Per Mertesacker out, who I hadn't even really considered, is a stroke of
Visionary.
genius. I have to give
Visionary.
this one a draw again. We're
Woo!
3-3. We're 3-3.
All right.
What?
Yeah, I have to give it a draw again. No, because I actually think the Ramsey thing is a really important point, given that the way he played last season, if he had found a way to replicate that, or even 90% of that this season, I think we are talking about a title challenge. Especially, I think it's easy to forget how much he struggled and we struggled in midfield in the beginning of the season, where we dropped a lot of crucial points. Like draws to Leicester, for example. There were a lot of bad results. The draw at home to Tottenham, the draw at home to Hull, results we really shouldn't have picked up. But let's move on.
Well, I'm just going to interrupt because I'm an arse. But outside of the points, because it's not really anyway. But
they're irrelevant. Yeah, you can say it. I know that's not going to score you any points in the next question.
Oh dear. What have I done now? Listen. But no. In response to Per, I think he's come in with some fairly unfair criticism this season, because I think his weakest aspects of his game have been brought to the fore as a result of not really utilizing or being forced to play him in games in which those weaknesses are highly exposed. When we're playing quick counter-attacking sides and playing a high line, something he's extremely uncomfortable with, and we regularly see him trying to compensate by pushing up beyond the halfway line and trying to intercept and make a tackle before that counter-attack is started. And as soon as and that it's an extremely high-risk strategy. And as soon as he commits himself in that manner, we leave ourselves with just two or three players desperately rushing to get back, and he's certainly not. He's not going to be making any ground to.
I don't
recover
disagree with you, James.
High risk strategy and also a very poor strategy.
I don't disagree with you, but I think that. Go ahead.
What I mean that comes down to is I think that perhaps it's been a result of the delay in structuring the squad in the way in which we now have a player like Gabriel that can be now is being gradually eased in to be able to play those types of games, and he's been forced to play matches that really don't suit the strongest components to his game. Whereas we've seen, like, for example, I think it was West Brom away, he was absolutely imperious, was that man of the match when we're being bombarded and we're having to sit deep and there's balls constantly coming into the box and we're playing 10 men behind the ball. I think, for example, it was also Man City as well. Those are the types of games that he flourishes in because his positional sense is phenomenal. He uses his height extremely well. He's fantastic in the air. But as soon as we're playing against a team that is very quick on the ground and we're pushing up against them, I know it's easier to say, well, it's inherently it's not his fault that he's slow, but I think that's just partly down to also the structure and the shape in which the squad was built by not bringing in a defender, say, in the summer or early enough in order to be able to play that type of defender in those types of games.
I don't disagree with you, but I think you are sort of glossing over things that aren't related to just his pace. I think the decision to step up, for example, for the second Monaco goal was suicidal and stupid and lazy because he didn't want to get himself in a situation where he had to do the work to track back. I think not getting in the way of Kondogbia's shot is on him. We've seen other situations where he's been switched off. I'm not saying he's terrible, by the way, and he's still had some good performances, some really strong performances, like at West Ham, where we had to just defend wave after wave after wave of set piece, and we had like 400 clearances. But I think it's fair to suggest that he has. Look, the proof is in the pudding in that it's clear that Arsene Wenger is considering Gabriel as an alternative for pair in certain games, and that would have been unthinkable relatively recently. Let's move on.
Well, listen, just very quickly, sorry, because I think that's all completely fair. But at the same time, in a team in which we kept the most number of clean sheets last season, those exact issues were also shown up in, when we played at Anfield, a team that executed that strategy absolutely perfectly. Sure. I mean, that Per and Koscielny axis that we constantly went on about, that Mertesiani, we'd already seen it in the flesh that it was something that was quite easily exposed at times. Again, we saw it at Stamford Bridge.
If your fullbacks are both pressed up the pitch and you have no pace or defensive awareness in the defensive midfield position. I agree with you that it may be harsh, but I think it's similar to your selection of Ramsey. We're talking about two players who we think could have done more this season, who have underperformed what expectations are. And I certainly think Mertesacker got off to a bad start to the season when he just did not look totally focused and ready. To be fair, your point is also understandable that we needed another center back, and we didn't get one. But the good news is we're a half hour into this podcast. And we only have like 9 subjects left to get to. So let's press on. I'm probably going to have to make some cuts here, unfortunately. But maybe we can keep it light and keep it moving. Let's go back to the positive side, and we'll go to you, Paul. Who's been your best player of the season so
far? Tough one. I think obviously. Well, I won't do a James and go through the round robin. I will have the good taste to let him pick a second or a third. I'm gonna. You know what? Looking across the board, there's some obvious ones. I'm going to go with Coquelin. One, because of his significant major impact on our performance. And two, because of the delta in terms of his previous standing in the club and the step up. I mean, it's just a massive upgrade in that position. And Sanchez is the other prospect. I've changed my mind. I'm going to pee in the swimming pool. But he's tailed off significantly in the last 4 to 6 weeks. So if it were a little earlier in the season, I think he's a really good shout.
I think it's fair to say this, right? Yeah. That as great as Sanchez has been, we had players in that position who were effective.
Yeah.
Whereas when Arteta went down, and even potentially before he went down, just because he's starting to lose his legs, we did not have a player who was effective in the defensive midfield position. So the
and the knock-on effect of Coquelin across the team in terms of how we play and how we press. This thing of having three players up front who can press without Coquelin, that's just death.
And I think you look at replacement cost, right, or replacement value. If you can't play Alexis, do you have someone you can play who's effective? Yes. If you can't play Coquelin, do you have someone who you can play who's effective? We really have seen that we do not. So I take your point on board that what he's brought to the side is what the side maybe needed more than anything. And so it's a great shout. But James has a chance to steal the points depending on his answer. Who's been your player of the season for Arsenal so far?
Well, knowing you, I've got this one in the bag. Right? Listen, if we were doing this podcast at the actual mid-season break, say in January, without any doubt, we'd all be choosing Alexis.
Yeah.
But he's been worn out. He's shown a pretty long patch of
indifferent form.
It's probably slightly substandard form, which he does somewhat make up for. Just the kind of work ethic and his all-round play as a player, both defensively and offensively. I guess in a similar fashion to that of Welbeck. But the thing with Giroud is, right? And
I see James is doing a James here.
When do I not, Paul?
That's a good point. Nominative determinism. If you are James, you have to do a James. Yeah, go for it.
The thing with Giroud is he's actually had an extremely consistent season from the start. He came in, I think he actually started off on the bench. I think it was against Everton. He scored that late equaliser for the 2-2 game. And he had a decent start to the season, then had that long injury layoff, and it somewhat coincided, although we'd started the season badly either way, with a pretty poor patch of form. And I think there was a lot of, as there tends to be, sort of positivity surrounding, and perhaps hysteria is not the right word, but a lot of fans were delighted to see Danny Welbeck starting up front as the new man at the club with his pace and the small sort of all-round ability. We talked about, well, you don't need to have the Giroud and Walcott combination because Welbeck he provides both the hold-up play and the pace and da-da-da-da. But what we've really seen is since Giroud's been back that, what you really want from a striker is someone that's able to consistently find the back of the net, which unfortunately Danny doesn't really provide on a very consistent basis. Certainly not now as his confidence and has dropped somewhat since the early parts of the season. And Giroud's season as a whole has improved, and I think it's something that's talked about a lot with Olivier from his time at Montpellier and even last season compared to his first season at the club. But as a player who I think is 29 now, he's gone on leaps and bounds once again. His finishing is far more clinical. He's one of the highest. He has one of the highest chance conversion rates in the league. His goals per game, especially in 2015, is comparable with the top players, I think, globally. Frankly, I mean his goals to game compared to say a Diego Costa is more than matched.
He leads the Premier League in goals per minutes played.
Oh well, there you have it. And I just there are also small things to his game that I think have improved even further, and perhaps it's to do with the competition that's now being provided with Danny Welbeck. A, in the sense that he knows his position isn't necessarily guaranteed, but B, it means that he doesn't. Partly because of the injury he incurred, it's meant that he hasn't had to play every single game. I think he racked up the most number of minutes last season for us, or so he was certainly up there in the prior season. But his hold-up play really, and when you watch it in the flesh, it truly is remarkable. His ability to take the ball down and relieve pressure for us, especially now that we have a goalie in Ospina who has a much greater affinity to just pump the ball forward. And he's got a very slick touch for a forward. You see when he comes out wide, his ability to cut the ball back and chip it back. Although it wasn't this season, a perfect example of that was, say, that Norwich goal that Ramsey scored last year, and I'm sure there have been plenty of examples this season too. But most importantly is just his all round finishing from set pieces to knockdowns to sort of shots outside the area, for example, against United. And perhaps the one thing that we've said is a little lacking is finishing with his right foot. Mm-hmm. But I think most of that actually came following that Monaco defeat, in which he just, he had one of those days. But in general,
the Monaco defeat.
It does stand out in my mind quite prominently.
Yeah,
as we get to awarding the points.
But the final thing I will say is, listen, outside of that match, and let's not forget he did recover that in the away fixture. He's clearly a player that is extremely mentally strong, but one of the biggest critiques we had of him last season, and we have touched upon this before, was his inability to score against the big sides. And that's something that's really changed this year. I mean, you look to United, Liverpool, the Monaco away, City. I'm sure there are, in fact, I'm convinced there are a couple of others that I'm probably forgetting. But he's a player that's now scoring big goals at big occasions, and is genuinely winning us games, and it's been a delight to see.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is if you look at Alexis, and there's no denying that Alexis from start to finish, start of the season to now, has just been brilliant, even if his form has dipped. But our best results and our overwhelming best run of results has coincided not with the peak performance of Alexis, but with the peak performance of Coquelin and Giroud. And so I think that's crucial. I lean towards saying that Giroud is the correct choice here, except he cost us the Champions League. And because of that, I'm going to split the points again. You dodged a bullet there, Paul.
Thanks.
I'm not going to lie to you.
It was a brave choice.
It was a brave choice. I think on the merits, though, costing us the Champions League means he has to get marked down just a bit. So. Yeah.
Elliot, I think while we're on the topic, our listeners would love to hear how much you now love Olivier Giroud.
I love him. I really do. I would say that, look, here's the thing that drives me nuts, right? People say, oh, do you have an agenda? You're negative or you're positive. And I have to admit, I play to the crowd sometimes too, because we all sort of get caught up with what our persona is and what people think we are, and then you feel like you have to live up to that or live down to that. But I have always just given the opinion that I think is right in the moment. So when Giroud first arrived, he was slow. His conversion rate was extremely substandard. And I felt that having had Ian Wright and Dennis Bergkamp, Thierry Henry and Robin Van Persie and Reyes and Anelka, that we were not following suit with a player of similar capability, because you'd be lying if you said that his conversion rate and his overall performance was adequate. It wasn't. Not to be the only striker at Arsenal who had any chance to start. Let's remember, we started Yaya Sanogo against Bayern Munich. That's not acceptable in any realm. That is not acceptable. That's throwing away the Champions League. And I'm hearing people screaming into their, whatever their device they're listening on. But he played well against Bayern, and he caused problems. Yaya Sanogo should not be starting for Arsenal Football Club against Bayern. And the fact that he did it all, and I realize some of it was a punishment for Giroud with the behavior and all that, but is a recognition that we did not have a number one star striker at Arsenal that the manager trusted to cause Bayern problems. Credit to him. His finishing has improved. His all-around play has improved. His physicality is extraordinary. He is a better player today than he was then. He is now a player who has raised his game in the most important area, finishing. You now trust him to put chances away. Not so much against Monaco in the first leg, but he does it. And so I never had an agenda against Giroud. I gave my opinion, which is that I thought he wasn't good enough. He's proved me wrong by improving. So anyone who thinks he was good enough was wrong before, but anyone who doesn't see the improvements he's made now is just stubborn. And that's just the way I see it. Now I've gone off on a rant. You see what you guys do to me?
Sheesh.
It's ridiculous.
Jesus
There you have it,
Christ.
folks.
I mean, it is ridiculous that we started Yaya Sanogo against Bayern Munich. I mean, all things aside, it's ridiculous.
We fucked with their minds, Elliot.
Yeah,
and it
well,
worked.
all right. And if we had made the penalty, who knows? But anyway, but let's go. I'm going to try to combine some questions now. We're going to talk about the manager here for a second. I want you to give me the thing you think Arsene has gotten most right this season and the thing you think Arsene has gotten most wrong this season. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to limit it and say that you cannot, for the most wrong thing, answer not buying a DM or a center back in the summer, because it's such well-trod ground. So we'll start with you, James. We're going to keep it snappy now. Let's keep it moving real quick. The thing Arsene has gotten most wrong this season and the thing he's gotten most right this season.
Interesting. Well, most wrong, arguably, was his determination to field the 4-1-4-1 formation at the beginning of the season, and trying to shovel Ramsey and Jack together in the side. And I think a combination of perhaps bringing in the new players, maybe this World Cup hangover, certainly with, Mesut not being able to play for the first few games and Pear's lack of form, the combination of all that didn't help the start to the season. I think that's probably what's cost us the most this year.
What do you get the most right?
What do you get the most right? Well, I mean, I think the easiest answer would be the ability to bring in a player like Alexis in the transfer window, which I know he gets a lot of credit for, but the kind of criticisms that a lot of fans have directed towards Arsene have very much surrounded often his inability in the modern day now to compete in the transfer market and to be able to bring in the top talent, and his stubbornness to bring in players that we need. And in some ways, it's a somewhat typical Arsene move to bring in a player where we're in a position that we're quite well stacked, but to bring in a player that of that quality from a side like Barcelona, and to bring into Arsenal Football Club, I think in itself demonstrates the kind of draw and attraction that Arsene has as a manager. But as you know, I mean, I'm going to keep it to that. But
Yep, that's good.
But you know that for me, I think there are many a thing that Arsenal does well.
No,
But
the
I'll
question
leave
was
it to
most
Paul.
right. So I think those are good picks, wrong and right. Paul, what did he get most wrong this season, and what has he been spot on with? What was his biggest correct move?
My biggest frustration with him, and the thing he has gotten most wrong, is again back to the naivete, because we've been here before, he's been here before. Talking about how at Monaco he was bewildered that we pushed on when 2-1 would have been an okay result. Well, he's the one who brought on Ox instead of Coquelin. Now, it got us a goal, but in all of that, there should have been the communication to steady the ship at the back. And he was like, I don't know what happened here. I don't know where they all went. But we saw that again against Anderlecht. I mean, you can go back to, is it 2 years ago against Dortmund when we were 1-1 at the Emirates?
And we didn't settle for it, and we let them hit us.
And he gave the same speech at the end that something about when you cannot win it, you should not lose it. Mm-hmm. Well, the same applied to the Monaco tie, in that it was a two-legged tie and we hadn't lost it. But we did by the time we went 3-1 down. And so that's what he got most wrong. There are times he's shown more pragmatism. And to me with the Arsenal, the bigger the stakes get and the better we are as a team and a squad, he becomes more pragmatic. When there's more he will play that game in a way that's a little less Arsenal.
Yeah.
And I think he has been slow to respond to that. He responded at City. He's responded in a number of games since there where he's been more pragmatic in his approach. And that's good. It's almost like a maturing of where our model is at the moment in this particular cycle. But I think he got it seriously wrong and damaged the team, the club, the squad much more than it needed to be in the Champions League in terms of overall morale with those two defeats that were unnecessary.
What about what has he gotten most right?
I think what we did at United, the way we set up, the way we went after them, the way we played, the way he got our heads right in a big game. Mm-hmm. One of my frustrations as well is sometimes I don't feel he sent them out for the big games with the right mentality. And I can't prove that. I'm not in the room with them when he's given their talks, but when you get that feeling that there's no big leaders on the field, mm-hmm. that comes back to Arsene. Yes, he's picked the players, but beyond that, he's sent them out in a way in which they're not expressing themselves. And I really feel he got it right at United. And I still remember the smile he had at the end of it. The reason I think that smile was a really big deal is not just because I'm happy for the old bastard. It's because it told me what I want to suspect is the case, which is he wanted that win as much as we did and mm-hmm. more. I mean, you saw various comments this week about from Arsene about, when he loses a game, he doesn't come out for 3 or 4 days. That's probably a bad game that he's lost. But, nobody hurts over this shit. Nobody hurts losing to United 8-2 more than Arsene does.
Oh, yeah. I definitely believe that the hunger and the fire is there. I mean, we can debate Arsene all you want, but he lives a monk's life of devotion to this, and it personally hurts him every time he doesn't get the result. So this is an interesting one, though, because you guys have both gotten what he got right part wrong. But I think James nailed the thing I was looking for on the thing he got wrong, which is we should be in a title race, and the reason we're not, in my opinion, is we tried to play that 4-1-4-1 right at the beginning of the season with Ozil on the left and Jack and Ramsey all squeezed in there, and I think he did it because he has tremendous loyalty to Jack Wilshere. He was trying to find a way to just put them all on the pitch, which is how you play FIFA, but I don't know that it worked for us. And Stilberto, or Tim Stillman, wrote on this earlier too, which is in a short summer with no preseason, where your Germans aren't even there, to try to institute a totally new system that plays your players in positions they're not used to while integrating a dynamic new player in Sanchez. Very risky, didn't click, didn't work, cost us points early in the season. So I think that was crucial. The thing he got most right, in my opinion, which is the one that matters, You guys, you know what I've loved about this run we're on since January? The ruthless Arsene Wenger has kind of come back. I used to go on rants saying it's just too cozy to play at Arsenal. You play poorly, you keep playing. You act out, you keep playing. You lose, no problem. You win, that's great. Like, it was all very comfortable. There were no consequences. And whether I agree with some of the decisions he's made or not, he threw Wojciech Szczesny on the scrap heap for a casual performance against Southampton and smoking in the showers. He cut Lucas Podolski loose when it was clear he was kind of an irritant and wasn't giving enough on the pitch, along with Joel Campbell, who just didn't look good enough, period. He has allowed competition to come into the squad. He has benched Mertesacker for poor performances when he needed to be benched. He has rewarded players who deserve to be rewarded with playing time and not rewarded players who don't deserve it. He's made tough choices to bench Ramsey for Cazorla or Cazorla for Ramsey based on performance. I just think a little of that ruthlessness that tells the players you need to be on your game, you need to be focused, you need to be professional, or you're not going to play, or you're not going to be here. And I think that leadership is how you go to Old Trafford and you win, and how you go to City and you win, and how you really make strides as a team, is for the players to know that if they are not switched on, their manager is not afraid for there to be consequences. And it'll be very interesting to see what happens when Jack Wilshere comes back, to see if he's given that gentle, loving treatment that he's always sort of seemed to get and just gets his starting spot back. That'll be very interesting. But thankfully that time has not come yet. So I awarded the points to James. No problem, Paul. There's still plenty of time to come back into this. It's going to be okay. So how about this real quick? Real quick answer here. What's been your biggest surprise? The thing about this season, about Arsenal, that has surprised you the most? Pleasantly, unpleasantly, whatever it is. Biggest surprise at Arsenal. Paul, I'll give you the first go at it so you can try to retake, or at least claw your way back into the tie.
I think the changes, the variability, the flexibility that we're starting to see with the bigger squad, the level of competition across the different places. There's a battle at every position, pretty much, has strengthened Arsenal's hand and confidence to move things around, and I think that's given them a confidence across the board to kind of screw around with things and be ballsy and make changes and be unpredictable, unpredictably predictable. So that's the thing that I might have hoped for during the summer, but looking back on it is the thing I'm most surprised and relieved to see, that he's now doing stuff with the formula, making changes in terms of the lineup, in terms of the philosophy, in terms of the approach.
Well, it's a great point. Look, he didn't start Giroud against United at Old Trafford. He played Welbeck, and it's just a message to the whole team that I can go a lot of different ways and we can still win. What about...
And on that, I mean, he made it very clear. He made that decision right at the last minute, and he told Welbeck right at the last minute. So it's not like there was a really obvious reason for doing it. He's trying different things because he has the confidence in the players. He had the confidence that Welbeck could do what Giroud was doing, but it was Welbeck's time at Old Trafford. So that's a great illustration of the point.
What about you, James? What surprised you the most this season?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, just very quickly to add to that, I think it's also partly to do with the fact that it's the kind of squad that he's wanted to build. And has had at his disposal, certainly from like a depth point of view and a versatility point of view, as strong as he's had for, I would say, close to a decade. So for me, that hasn't been so much as a surprise. It's, although not explicitly in that regard, but it's partly been what I've kind of been voicing since January as to the way in which he's able to now utilize a squad that's so deep. I think, from a positive point of view, what surprised me the most has been the ability to kind of stray away slightly from the philosophy of playing beautiful football that Wenger has always loved to do, even away to big teams, even with sort of weaker squads at his disposal. He's looked to try and control the game from a possession standpoint. And I think I've been most surprised with his willingness to control the game in a different way without the ball. In particular, for example, the City game, but even say the 5-0 victory against Aston Villa at home, where we had less than 50% of the ball. So that has been an extremely pleasant surprise.
Yeah.
Again, that touched on the versatility, but specifically in the way that he's able to shape the team. Very, literally one sentence. I'm also, because of how, in general optimistic I am with this team, I'm also particularly surprised by how naive we still have been able to be in a couple of games, particularly, say, Anderlecht United and Monaco. I mean, you can maybe excuse one of those games in a season, but not three.
When I look back on this season, no matter what happens from here, it's hard to imagine that anything will be as disappointing to me as crashing out to Monaco. That will be something that haunts me because I think this team is on a really nice run, and you never know. Could we have beaten Juventus? I think we could have, and suddenly you're in the semifinals. So, I don't know, just disappointing. I'm surprised, though, that neither of you mentioned the surprise that I thought of. I think the two surprises that stand out to me the most are, one, that a guy who'd been thrown on the scrap heap at Charlton and wasn't pulling up trees, theirs particularly, can come back and be a player of the season candidate for us. I think Coughlin's performance is shockingly surprising. And I think right there, along with him, has to be Hector Bellerin. Here's a 19-year-old kid who no one thought would be in the team. Jenkinson gets loaned out. Debussy gets injured. Chambers starts to look like he was never a right back to begin with. And suddenly we're saying, this has been bungled again. And Bellerin has put all that to rest to the point that now people don't know that Debussy even gets his place back when he comes back. And so I think between Coughlin and Bellerin, you have two incredibly surprising stories that are shaping the success that Arsenal are having. And, I think right now, two things that we would have thought 6 months ago was certainty are that we're going to struggle until Debussy comes back, and we need to buy a defensive midfielder in the summer. And two players you never would have expected to be on the radar in August may have answered those two positional issues for us through their performance this season.
And I think Bellerin may well be world class.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't know till they prove it, but I think he might be.
Well, and he's doing it over a stretch of time now. Chambers stormed onto the scene for a few games, looked brilliant, and then started to fade. Bellerin has done it for an extended period. Plus, he has that one raw quality that makes a football player so difficult to beat, and that's pace. And when you have the pace he has, you always have a chance to be special.
Yeah, I agree. I do genuinely believe he will be world class. Mm-hmm. But spoiler alert, Debussy will be right back in that team when he's back.
I think Debussy will play a lot, but I think Bellerin will play a lot too. I don't think he just drifts out of the picture. Now, to be fair, he's played a lot of football. He's very young. Maybe the best thing for him is not to have to play all the time. I wouldn't be surprised if he starts the semifinal against Reading, that's for sure. Let me say that I've given Paul the points only because I think James' answer was a second cousin of Paul's answer. And as a result, I've given him the points. Okay, we're going to move on to one of my favorite topics. Funniest moment of the season generally doesn't have to be Arsenal related. There are really only two choices. Paul, I will give you James, I will give you the advantage of picking first.
Because it's so fresh in my mind, I know what the other one would be, but it has to be the Gerrard moment, without any shadow of a doubt. A phrase I keep saying, but
okay. It's the stamp. You're saying?
Yes, 100%.
It was absolutely fucking epic. What about you, Paul? Funniest moment other than the stamp?
I've blanked beyond the stamp. I'm going to have to go with an Arsenal one. It's not going to win this debate, but
this is a layup because if you thought of the other one, you'd win it.
I didn't think of it. Unless you're thinking what I'm thinking, Elliot, which is Giroud's chicken dance after his goal. I want to know what it's about.
I'm going to answer for you, Paul.
Yeah, go
Bradford
ahead.
at Stamford Bridge.
Oh, it's funny. That was not the one I had in mind, although that was on my list, but the winning funniest moment, because it's bigger. The Gerrard stamp is right there. It's right there. It's like we do not let this slip right there. I also think United shitting themselves against Leicester early in the season. What were they up 3-0 and lost 5-3? That's what it was, right?
It was 3-1 and then
3-1 they lost. I mean, that was it. But Chelsea, up a man, second leg, just need to shut it down and do what Mourinho teams do, and they lose to PSG at home, up a man. It was fantastic. And David Luiz scoring, a crucial goal. Everything about it was hilarious. Just hilarious. And I think...
But was it funny?
Yeah, it was really, really funny. Like, I laughed myself to sleep that night.
Okay, just checking.
So, unfortunately, I can't have that not be the pick, but Gerard's
but the chicken
stamp.
dance.
The chicken dance I blocked out of my mind because
funny.
I was so disturbed by it. Yeah, I mean, there have been a lot of little funny Arsenal moments, and I appreciate you coming up with one off the top of your head, but I think we both know that the Gerard stamp is going to win this one, so we're going to go with James there. We're down to the very, very end here, which is good. Timing-wise, we've done well, and I've only cut out 2 topics that really didn't matter. So our last 2 topics are a little predictive. We'll start with you on this one, Paul. Your prediction for how we end the season, League and FA Cup. I don't need every game or everything that happens. Where you think we'll end in the League and where you think we'll end in the FA Cup.
Okay, well, I don't like doing these things, and as a matter of principle, I won't. But my cousin Jerry is going to come on the line for this. All right. He comes from the same part of Dublin, same family, same everything. So
exactly
voice very similar, very similar. If you listen closely, you can see certain nuances.
All right, put him on.
All right.
All right, here we go. Right, so this is Jerry here.
Hey, Jerry.
I'm going to. How are you?
I'm Elliot.
Welcome
This
to
is
the pod,
James.
Jerry.
Big fan, Elliot.
Thanks.
James.
As
James,
I
not
would
so
expect.
much. Your points sucked. I was listening, and your points sucked.
I'll be the judge of that. Come on,
Yeah.
Jerry. What's your prediction for the
Okay.
end of the season?
I'm gonna go. I want to say second, but I'm going to go third, just out of probability in the league. But fuck it, second. FA Cup. That's a 50-50. I think Liverpool will be in sparkling form and it'll be an FA Cup final, but I think we'll want it more, strangely. So I'm going to go with us winning the FA Cup.
FA Cup in second. Thanks, Jerry. You can put Paul back on the line. James, your chance. What do you think? There is only one right answer here.
Okay. Well, we win the league and the FA Cup. Oh, right. No.
Well, no
I'll
points.
have what he's having.
No points.
I'm gonna go. No, I mean we'll finish third, and chances are we'll win the FA Cup.
Okay, you each get a point there because you're correct. We will win the FA Cup. You are incorrect about where we will finish in the league. Obviously, we will finish in the only place we are allowed to finish, and that is fourth. It's written in the stars, my friends. We will finish fourth. And I assure you there will still be some big bitching and moaning along the way as we manage to drop points either at Old Trafford or home to Chelsea or something along the way. I would have gladly accepted League and FA Cup double as the answer, but James shied away from it. So now we will finish off with this. I want you to play manager for a minute. It's the summer. We've finished fourth. We're back in a Champions League qualifier. We've won the FA Cup. There were good moments and bad moments this season. Francis Coquelin looks like he's developing. Is he the answer? I don't know. Paul?
Is he the answer?
No. Here's the question.
Oh, sorry.
Who are the two players? You can spend however you want as long as I judge in my wisdom that it's actually feasible. Who are the two players that make us legitimate challengers for every major honor that we'll be competing for?
Well, Schneiderlin.
Mm-hmm.
Troubles me that he hasn't received any phone calls from Arsen, but Schneiderlin. I don't know. We need much after that.
So you're gonna save the money and just go Schneiderlin.
I'm going to spend all the money on Schneiderlin, who's going to be no longer 25 million by the time we get to him.
Okay, that is a gutsy way to answer when I gave you the fantasy keys to the fantasy locker to fantasy spend on fantasy two players.
I've thought about it a lot. Short of, unless we don't sort out our goalkeeping situation, but I think we will.
Arsene Wenger has rotted your brain. I give you fantasy money to spend on 2 players, and you give it back.
That's why we get on so well.
Fantastically. I love it, though. I do love the gumption. Okay, James, spend my money, would you? 2 players. Who do we need?
Well, yeah, I mean, Schneiderlin's the easy choice in that.
Sadly, he's taken.
Do I have to go 2 different players?
You do. Well, he only picked one.
I only picked one.
Congratulations.
Jesus.
Right, but I mean, 2.
Fuck's sake.
Okay, sure. How many defensive bloody midfielders do I know?
How about
Wanyama.
how about the one who plays next to Schneiderlin? Yeah.
Sure. Okay, well, listen. Either way, Flamini's gone. If Arteta stays, if he extends his contract for another year, he's going to play more of a sort of kind of coaching
advisory role. Yeah.
Advisory role in the dressing room. So I think it will be a defensive midfielder that either sits alongside Coquelin or kind of interchanges with him. Sure, I'll go Wanyama, because I don't really know many defensive midfielders in world football. I'll leave that to Arsene. Assuming he can't get.
What about Kondogbia?
Maybe. But listen, I don't watch enough. I've seen Kondogbia play twice.
Isn't that enough to form a podcast-worthy opinion?
That was a good goal he scored.
So frankly, I'm no expert on whether Kondogbia is even defensive-minded enough to suit that role, or be if he's even good enough outside of 2 performances. Where
so I take it you don't want Paul Pogba then?
Well, I mean, I would love Paul Pogba, but if we're looking for viable, feasible options,
I know. All right, who's your number 2?
My number 2 is, now I'm going to assume Theo leaves.
Yes, I like where you're headed.
And I'm going to assume that means Welbeck kind of plays. It becomes more permanently a sort of winger role with, say, Oxlade-Chamberlain, and then our wide players on the left, and thus I'd like a second striker along with Giroud. Now, since we're talking fancy, but sort of within the realms of possibility.
We can buy anyone in the world not named Ronaldo or Messi. So go with whoever you want.
Well, I mean, then I would go.
I want Pogba.
No, but I mean, kind of. I don't think it would ever happen, but I think it is genuinely feasible. And I probably take Daniel Sturridge, because I think if you want a second striker, ideally, you want one that has opposing qualities to that of Giroud. I think he's an absolutely excellent finisher. He's so quick, and he's dynamic. I mean, you also get the added hilarity of sort of stealing a striker from a competing team, which we've been on the other side of far too many times. I mean, listen, in a dream world, sure, I'd take an Aguero, or maybe even just an Ibrahimovic for one season, since he always wins. He always wins league titles, right? But no, I'll go with Daniel Sturridge and Victor Wanyama.
The correct answers are Schneiderlin and Gareth Bale.
Okay.
Bale to replace Theo, but with a little more strength, and pace and power and finishing and everything else, because they want him out at Madrid, and we have history of doing business with Madrid, and it would be the greatest thing since Saul Campbell, and Schneiderlin. So because Paul got Schneiderlin, and because he had the audacity to not buy 2 players, I'm giving him the points for sheer audacity.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to tally these up. James finishes with 11. Solid total. Paul finishes with 11. Solid total. Unfortunately, what neither of you failed to pay attention to was Elliot with 17 points, racing away with it. So we'll do this again some other time.
We thought you were the hare in the greyhound racing. You were actually in the race.
I was like Arsenal in this year's title race. You never saw me coming until the very end, which was also true of my wife before she got pregnant. So we are going to leave it at that disturbing thought. And next time we speak to you, it'll be just after Arsenal have polished off Liverpool, who will hilariously be without Steven Gerrard and stamptastically be without Martin Skirtle as well. But before that, we have to say goodbye to our lovely guests. There are no parting gifts, but we thank you for your participation. This was a lot of fun. I'm glad we did it. Brighten up the international break. James, you can find him at GoonerFanatic49 on Twitter. James, what a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still shocked you didn't get 21 points, Elliot. But yes, it was An absolute pleasure. Cheers, guys.
I docked myself points for ever having doubted Olivier Giroud. And delightful. I cannot thank him enough for coming on. His name on Twitter is Pausing in My Pants. Here on the podcast, we know him as Paul, or sometimes known as the man who won't even spend my fake money. Paul, a pleasure as ever.
I will pick Marco Reus as my second player.
Oh, and I melt into my chair. I am your humble and victorious host, Elliot Smith. You can block me on Twitter at Yankee Gunner. It's been an absolute pleasure. Hopefully we will have a wonderful finish to the season. We will talk to you after a glorious victory over Liverpool. Until then, enjoy the terrible, terrible morass of international football. We'll see you in about 2 weeks. Cheers.